The wind screamed across the Montana plains like a wounded animal, and through the white curtain of snow, Vincent Yates could barely make out the figure collapsed against his front gate, dark hair plastered to a pale face streaked with frozen tears. He'd been checking the barn one last time before the blizzard hit full force when he heard it, a sound that cut through the howling wind like a knife through butter. Crying. Raw, desperate sobbing that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt since the war ended 3 years ago in 1868. Vincent grabbed his rifle out of habit, but something told him he wouldn't need it. He pulled his coat tighter and pushed through the mounting drifts toward his property line. She was small, he realized as he got closer, barely visible against the white wooden gate that marked the entrance to his ranch. Her clothes were soaked through, a thin traveling dress that might have been blue or gray, he couldn't tell in the storm. No coat, no hat. Her hands were red and raw where they gripped the fence posts, and she'd stopped crying now, just shaking so hard her teeth chattered loud enough to hear over the wind. "Madam," Vincent called out, but she didn't respond. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. He'd seen that look before on soldiers who'd marched too long in the cold. She was past the point of helping herself. He didn't waste time with more questions. Vincent scooped her up in his arms, surprised at how light she was, all bone and desperation. She made a small sound of protest, but didn't fight him. Her skin was ice cold where his hand touched her cheek, pushing the wet hair back from her face. He turned back toward the house, moving as fast as he dared through snow that was already knee-deep in places. The ranch house was modest but well-built, thick logs chinked tight against the Montana winters. Vincent kicked the door shut behind them, grateful for the fire he'd built up before going out. The main room glowed warm and orange, heat rushing to meet them as he carried the woman to the chair closest to the hearth. "You're safe here now," he said, more to himself than to her. She still hadn't spoken, hadn't really looked at him. Vincent grabbed the quilts from his bed in the corner and wrapped them around her shoulders, then knelt down to look at her hands. The fingers were white at the tips, not a good sign. He'd need to warm her slowly or risk making it worse. He put water on to heat and rummaged through his limited supplies for anything that might help. Clean cloths, the whiskey he saved for special occasions, spare clothes that would swallow her whole but at least be dry. When he turned back, she was watching him, really seeing him for the first time. Her eyes were the color of pine needles, green and deep, set in a face that would be beautiful if it wasn't so pale and frightened. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a croak, rough from crying and cold. "My ranch about 5 miles outside Custer," Vincent said, keeping his tone gentle as he approached with a cup of warm water. "Not hot, not yet. I'm Vincent Yates. You were at my gate. Do you remember how you got here?" She took the cup with shaking hands, staring into it like it held answers instead of water. I think I walked, from town, or maybe before town. I don't remember all of it. You walked 5 miles in this storm." Vincent couldn't keep the shock from his voice. People died in blizzards like this one, froze solid 50 feet from their own front doors. The fact that she'd made it this far was either pure luck or pure stubbornness. "I couldn't stay," she whispered. "I couldn't. He would have found me." There it was, the explanation Vincent had been waiting for. A woman didn't end up alone in a Montana blizzard without a damn good reason. He pulled up another chair and sat down across from her, rifle within reach but not threatening. "Who would have found you?" She looked at him then, really looked, taking in his face, his size, the way he held himself. Vincent knew what she saw. A tall man in his late 20s, dark hair that needed cutting, a scar along his jaw from a Confederate bayonet, and eyes that had seen too much violence to be truly young anymore. He tried to look as harmless as a man his size could look. "My husband," she said finally. "Martin Laurent, do you know him?" Vincent shook his head. "I don't get to town much, keep to myself mostly, but if he's your husband, won't he be worried? We should send word that you're safe." "No." She lurched forward so fast the water sloshed over the rim of the cup. "Please, no. You don't understand. He'll kill me if he finds me. He almost did tonight. That's why I ran." The firelight caught on her neck then as the quilt slipped, revealing dark bruises in the unmistakable shape of fingers. Vincent felt his jaw tighten, that old war rage stirring in his gut. He'd killed men for less during the war, though he wasn't proud of it. But a man who'd put his hands around a woman's throat like that deserved whatever came to him. "All right," Vincent said quietly. "All right. No one's sending word anywhere. You're safe here. That's a promise." She started crying again then, silent tears that tracked down her pale cheeks. "You don't know what you're saying. Martin has money influence. He knows the sheriff. He'll come looking. Let him come." Vincent stood and moved to the window, peering out at the wall of white beyond the glass. "No one's going anywhere in this storm. Not tonight, maybe not for days. That gives us time to figure things out." "Why are you helping me?" She sounded genuinely confused. "You don't know me." Vincent turned back to her, considering the question. Why was he helping her? The simple answer was that she'd needed help and he'd been there. But there was something else, something in those green eyes that called to a part of him he'd thought died somewhere in Virginia. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because no woman deserves to be left crying in a blizzard." She told him her name was Lila Laurent, though she said Laurent like it was poison on her tongue. She'd been married to Martin for 2 years, 2 years that had gotten progressively worse as his temper grew shorter and his fists grew quicker. Tonight had been the final straw, his hands around her throat until she saw stars, his voice promising that next time he wouldn't stop. She'd waited until he passed out drunk, and then she'd run with nothing but the clothes on her back and $3 hidden in her shoe. "I thought I'd make it to the train station," Lila said, finally sipping at the water Vincent had given her. Some color was coming back to her face now, a faint pink in her cheeks. "I didn't realize how far it was, or that the storm would get so bad so fast." "Montana weather doesn't give warnings," Vincent said. He'd made stew earlier, venison and potatoes that had been simmering all day. He ladled out a bowl and brought it to her. "You need to eat something. Get your strength back." She ate slowly at first, then faster as her body remembered its hunger. Vincent busied himself checking the fire, adding another log, trying not to stare. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she was, even half frozen and scared. It was the way she held herself, like she was trying to take up as little space as possible, trying to disappear. It made him angry all over again. The storm raged outside, wind battering the walls hard enough to rattle the windows. Vincent had weathered plenty of Montana winters in this house, built it himself after he came home from the war with nothing but his discharge papers and a land grant. He'd made something here, carved out a life from raw earth and stubborn determination. The ranch wasn't big, just enough cattle to keep him fed and a few horses he was training to sell. But it was his, and more importantly, it was safe. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Vincent said, trying to keep his voice matter of fact. "I've got some things you can wear. They won't fit right, but they'll be dry." Lila looked down at herself, seeming to notice for the first time that she was soaked through. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. Vincent fetched one of his spare shirts and a pair of pants, along with a belt and some thick socks. He set them on the table and then turned his back, moving to the window to give her privacy. He heard the rustle of fabric, the soft sounds of someone trying to change while wrapped in quilts. Outside, The snow was coming down so thick he couldn't see the barn anymore, couldn't see anything but white. They were completely cut off from the world, just the two of them and the storm. The thought should have been unsettling, but instead Vincent felt oddly calm, like something that was meant to happen was happening. "I'm decent," Lila said softly. He turned around and had to stop himself from smiling. She was drowning in his clothes, the shirt hanging off her shoulders, the pants rolled up at the cuffs and cinched tight with the belt. She draped the quilts back around herself like armor, just her face and hands visible. But she looked warmer now, more alive. "Thank you," she said. "For all of this, for not turning me away." "Wasn't going to turn away anyone in a storm like this," Vincent replied, "but especially not someone running for their life." They sat in silence for a while, just the crackling of the fire and the howl of wind filling the space. Vincent made coffee, strong and black, and they shared it while the night deepened around them. He found himself telling her about the ranch, about the cattle and horses, about how he'd come here to escape the ghosts of war and found something like peace. She listened with an intensity that made him self-conscious, like his words actually mattered. "It sounds lonely," Lila said when he paused. "Sometimes," Vincent admitted, "but after the war I needed the quiet." "I understand that," she said, "the quiet part." Martin was always so loud, yelling, throwing things, making sure everyone knew he was in charge. Sometimes I'd dream about silence. "Well, you've got plenty of it here, or at least you will once this storm passes." Lila's expression shifted, worry creasing her forehead. "What happens then?" "When the storm passes." It was a question Vincent had been asking himself. The practical answer was that she'd need to get out of Custer, get as far from her husband as possible. But the trains would take her east, back toward civilization and cities where a woman alone would be vulnerable. West meant rougher territory, mining camps and settlements where life was cheap and questions were few. "We'll figure it out," Vincent said. "First thing is keeping you safe. Everything else comes after." That first night, Vincent gave her his bed and took the floor near the fire. He could hear her breathing in the darkness, quick and shallow, like she couldn't quite let herself relax. He didn't blame her. Trust wasn't something that came easy when it had been broken as badly as hers had. But as the hours passed and exhaustion won out, her breathing slowed and deepened into real sleep. Vincent lay awake longer, listening to the storm and thinking about green eyes and bruised throats. He'd spent 3 years telling himself he was fine alone, that he didn't need anyone complicating his life. But maybe he'd been lying to himself. Maybe he'd just been waiting for someone worth opening his door for. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped inside while the wind screamed and snow piled up past the windows. Vincent had laid in plenty of supplies, so they didn't want for food, but the close quarters forced an intimacy neither of them was quite ready for. Lila was jumpy at first, flinching whenever Vincent moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. But gradually, as the hours turned into days, she began to relax. She helped cook, mending his clothes without being asked, darning socks and sewing buttons with neat, precise stitches. They talked, carefully at first, then more freely. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about parents who died of influenza and an aunt who'd pushed her toward marriage as the only respectable option for a young woman alone. "I thought Martin was kind," Lila said on the second day, stirring a pot of beans while Vincent worked on repairing a saddle. "He courted me properly, said all the right things. It wasn't until after the wedding that things changed." "That's not your fault," Vincent said firmly. "A man who hides his true nature to trap a woman is nothing but a coward." She looked at him with something like wonder. "Martin always said it was my fault, that I provoked him, that if I was a better wife, he wouldn't have to discipline me. That's a lie." Vincent set down the leather he'd been working on and met her eyes. Hitting someone smaller than you, someone who can't fight back, that's not discipline. That's just cruelty. Lila nodded slowly like she was trying to convince herself. I know that. In my head, I know that. But sometimes I still wonder if maybe I could have tried harder, been quieter, made him happier. You could have been perfect and he still would have found excuses, Vincent said. Men like that, they need someone to blame for their own anger. It's never about what you did or didn't do. They fell silent, but it was a comfortable silence now, the kind that existed between people who were starting to understand each other. Vincent went back to his saddle work, and Lila hummed softly as she cooked, a tune he didn't recognize but found himself listening for. On the third day, the wind finally died down and weak sunlight broke through the clouds. Vincent opened the door to find snow drifted halfway up the frame, the world transformed into an endless expanse of white. The barn was buried, just the roof visible, and the fence lines had disappeared entirely under the drifts. It's beautiful, Lila breathed, coming to stand beside him. She'd stayed carefully distant before, always making sure there was furniture or space between them. But now she stood close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, smell the soap she'd used to wash her hair in the basin that morning. Beautiful and deadly, Vincent agreed. I need to dig out to the barn, check on the animals. There's a rope tied from the porch to the barn door, should still be there under the snow. I'll follow that so I don't get lost. Can I help? He looked at her, this woman who'd nearly frozen to death 3 days ago, now offering to shovel snow in borrowed clothes and oversized boots. You ever worked a shovel before? No, she admitted. But I can learn. So they dug together, Vincent breaking through the heavy drifts while Lila scooped and cleared behind him. It was hard work, brutal work, and within an hour they were both sweating despite the cold. But they made progress, foot by foot, following the rope until they reached the barn. The animals had weathered the storm well enough. The cattle were pressed together for warmth in their shelter, and the horses nickered greetings when Vincent pushed open the barn door. He and Lila fed and watered them all, working side by side in the dim light that filtered through the snow-covered windows. You're good at this, Vincent observed, watching Lila fork hay with efficient movements. I like animals, she said simply. They don't lie or hide what they're feeling. A horse that doesn't like you will tell you straight out. I appreciate that. Vincent found himself smiling, really smiling for the first time in days. That's true enough. Horses are honest in a way people often aren't. They finished the chores and trudged back to the house, following their original path. The temperature was dropping again as the sun set, that bone-deep cold that came with Montana winter nights. Inside, Vincent built up the fire while Lila made coffee and heated leftover stew. Do you think anyone will come looking for me soon? Lila asked, the question she'd been holding back finally surfacing. Vincent considered it. Not until the roads are clear. And that won't be for at least a few more days, maybe a week. Snow this deep, it takes time to dig out. But yes, eventually he'll come looking, or send someone to look. I'm putting you in danger just by being here. That's my choice to make, not yours. Vincent accepted the coffee she handed him, their fingers brushing briefly. Besides, I've dealt with angry men before. I can handle your husband. You don't know Martin, Lila said quietly. He's not just angry, he's cruel. He enjoys hurting people, and he has friends, men who'll do whatever he asks. Lila, look at me. Vincent waited until her eyes met his. I fought in the war for 4 years. I've seen cruelty. I've seen men who enjoyed killing. I'm not easy to scare, and I don't back down when I know I'm doing the right thing. You're under my protection now. That means something. She blinked rapidly, eyes shining with unshed tears. Why? Why do you care so much about a stranger? Vincent didn't have a good answer for that, or at least not one he was ready to say out loud. Because when he looked at her, he saw someone worth protecting. Because her smile, rare as it was, made something in his chest feel lighter. Because in 3 days, she'd made his house feel less like a hiding place and more like a home. Because you deserve better than what you got, he said finally. And because I think maybe I needed someone to remind me why I built this place. The days after the storm passed in a strange sort of rhythm. Vincent worked the ranch, digging out paths, checking on his scattered cattle, making sure everything had survived. Lila worked beside him when she could, learning to feed chickens and collect eggs, to read the weather by the color of the sky, to move through deep snow without exhausting herself. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire and talk, or sometimes just be quiet together. Vincent taught her to play cards, and she turned out to be ruthless at poker, reading his bluffs with ease. She taught him a song her mother used to sing, teaching him the words until he could follow along in his rough, unpracticed voice. It was on one of these evenings, nearly a week after Lila had arrived, that Vincent realized he was in trouble. Real trouble. The kind that didn't involve guns or angry husbands but was somehow more dangerous. He was falling for her. Had probably been falling since he first carried her into his house, but now it was undeniable. The way she laughed at his bad jokes, the way she hummed while cooking, the way she looked at him sometimes like he'd hung the moon, it all added up to something he couldn't ignore anymore. But it was too soon, too complicated. She was still married, still hunted, still healing from wounds that went deeper than bruises. And he was, well, he was just a rancher trying to outrun his past. What did he have to offer someone like her? "You're thinking too loud," Lila said, looking up from the shirt she was mending. "I can practically hear it from here." Vincent shook his head. "Just worrying. We need to make plans. The roads will be clear soon. Your husband will start searching if he hasn't already." Her face fell, the small smile disappearing. "I know. I've been trying not to think about it." "I've been thinking about it plenty," Vincent said. "And I have an idea if you're willing to hear it. I'm listening. There's a settlement about 30 miles west of here, past the mountain pass. Silver mining town called New Haven. It's rough, but it's growing fast. A woman could disappear there, start over. I have a friend there, owns a boarding house. She's good people, doesn't ask questions." Lila set down her mending, fingers twisting together in her lap. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to be safe," Vincent corrected. "And you won't be safe here, not long term. Martin will find you eventually if you stay in Custer. But New Haven, that's different territory, different jurisdiction. He'd have a harder time tracking you there." "When would I go?" "Few days, maybe." "I'll take you myself, make sure you get there safe." She nodded, not looking at him. "That's very kind of you. You've been nothing but kind." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with everything they weren't saying. Vincent wanted to tell her to stay, to hell with her husband and the danger. He wanted to tell her that somewhere in the last week, his lonely house had started feeling like home again, and it was because of her. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he just nodded and went back to pretending to read the month-old newspaper he'd already memorized. 2 days later, Vincent was in the barn when he heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the door, Lila appearing beside him a moment later, her face pale. "Is it him?" she whispered. "Don't know yet. But you should get inside, stay out of sight. Vincent, go, now." She went, though he could feel her watching from the window as he stepped out into the yard. 6 men rode up, led by a man in an expensive coat that marked him as someone with money. He was handsome in a cold sort of way, blonde hair slicked back, pale eyes that scanned the property like he owned it. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Vincent called out, keeping his rifle visible but not quite raised. "I'm looking for my wife." the man said, and Vincent knew without being told that this was Martin Laurent. She ran off during the storm. I'm worried sick about her. You seen a woman traveling alone? Haven't seen anyone, Vincent lied easily. Storm hit too hard for traveling. Anyone caught out in it probably didn't make it. Martin's eyes narrowed. You sure about that? Because someone in town said they might have seen a woman heading this direction right before the snow started. Like I said, haven't seen anyone. Now if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do. Mind if we search your property? Martin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Just to ease my mind. You understand, I'm sure. I understand you're on my land without permission, Vincent said, his voice going flat. And I'm telling you politely to leave. Your wife isn't here. One of the other men, bigger than Martin but with the same cruel set to his mouth, shifted in his saddle. We don't need your permission, friend. We can search with or without your cooperation. Vincent raised the rifle now, not quite aiming but making his point clear. This is private property. You don't have the law on your side here, and I've got every right to defend what's mine, so I'll say it one more time. Leave. The tension stretched tight, 6 men against 1, but Vincent had been in worse odds during the war. He watched Martin's face, saw the calculation there, the weighing of options. Finally, Martin smiled again. We'll leave. For now, but I will find her, whoever she's with. And when I do, I'll make sure everyone involved regrets interfering in my marriage. That a threat? That's a promise. They rode off, but Vincent knew it wasn't over. He waited until they were out of sight before lowering the rifle and heading back to the house. Lila met him at the door, shaking. I heard everything, she said. Oh God, Vincent, I've made this so much worse for you. You haven't made anything worse. That man out there, he's the problem, not you. Vincent set the rifle down and took her hands, feeling how cold they were. But we need to move faster than I planned. We'll leave tomorrow, first light. Get you to New Haven before he comes back with more men or the sheriff. He knows, though. He knows I'm here somewhere. He suspects. That's different. And by the time he figures out where you went, you'll be long gone and too far for him to follow easily. Lila looked up at him, tears tracking down her face. I don't want to leave. I know I have to. I know it's the smart thing, but I don't want to. Vincent pulled her into his arms before he could stop himself, and she came willingly, pressing her face against his chest. He could feel her crying, feel the way she trembled, and something in him made a decision that his head would probably regret later. Then don't, he said quietly. Stay. We'll figure out the rest together. She pulled back just enough to look at him. You can't mean that. It's too dangerous. I fought in a war, Lila. Dangerous doesn't scare me, and you're worth fighting for. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and kind. I know you hum when you cook, and you're terrible at hiding your poker tells. I know that in a week you've made me feel more alive than I have in 3 years. And I know that letting you go would be the biggest mistake of my life. Vincent, he kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't thought through, just a sudden need to show her what words couldn't quite capture. For a heartbeat she froze, and Vincent thought he'd made a terrible mistake. But then she was kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and it felt like coming home after a long war. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lila touched her fingers to her lips like she couldn't quite believe what had happened. I'm still married, she whispered. Legally, I'm still his wife. Not in any way that matters, Vincent said, but if it bothers you, we'll fix it. We'll go to a lawyer in New Haven, get the marriage dissolved or annulled or whatever it takes. But I'm not letting you go, Lila. Not unless you tell me that's what you want. It's not, she said, almost laughing. It's not what I want at all. I want to stay here with you. I want to stop running. But Martin, let me worry about Martin. Right now, all you need to do is tell me if it's something you want. She kissed him again, softer this time, lingering. Yes, God help me, yes. They didn't go to New Haven the next day. Instead, they prepared for the confrontation they both knew was coming. Vincent taught Lila to shoot, setting up targets behind the barn and showing her how to hold a rifle, how to aim and breathe and squeeze the trigger. She wasn't a natural, but she was determined, and by the end of the day, she could hit the target more often than not. I never thought I'd need to know this, Lila said, lowering the rifle after a successful shot. Hopefully you won't, Vincent replied. But out here, it pays to be ready for anything. They reinforced the house too, Vincent boarding up one of the windows that faced the road and making sure all the doors had solid bars. It wasn't a fortress, but it would give them warning and protection if Martin came back with violence in mind. In the evenings, they'd sit close by the fire, talking about the future in hypothetical terms that were starting to feel more real. Vincent told her about his plans for the ranch, about wanting to expand the herd, maybe buy more land to the west. Lila talked about wanting a garden come spring, about learning to ride properly, about all the things she'd never been allowed to do as Martin's wife. He kept me locked up, she admitted one night, her head resting on Vincent's shoulder. Not literally, but I wasn't allowed to go to town alone, wasn't allowed to have friends or make decisions. Everything had to go through him. I felt like I was suffocating. You're free now, Vincent said, kissing the top of her head. Whatever happens, you're free. A week passed without any sign of Martin or his men. Vincent stayed vigilant, but as the days went on with nothing but the normal routine of ranch life, he started to hope that maybe Martin had given up, had decided his runaway wife wasn't worth the trouble. He should have known better. They came at night, 8 men this time, torches lighting up the darkness. Vincent heard the horses and was out of bed with his rifle before Lila had fully woken. He could see them surrounding the house, Martin at the front on a big bay horse. Yates, Martin's voice carried clear in the cold air. Send out my wife. This doesn't have to get ugly. Vincent moved to the window, Lila right behind him with the rifle he'd taught her to use. Leave my property, Laurent. You're not welcome here. That woman is my legal wife. You're harboring stolen property. She's not property, Vincent shouted back. She's a person with the right to choose her own life, and she's chosen to stay here. I'll have the sheriff on you for this. Kidnapping, theft, interfering with a man's marriage. You'll hang. The sheriff's jurisdiction ends at my property line, and we both know he can't prove anything. Now for the last time, leave. Martin's laugh was sharp and ugly. I was hoping you'd be difficult. Boys, burn the barn. Vincent's blood ran cold as he watched 4 of the men ride toward the barn, torches held high. The horses were in there, the cattle nearby. They'd die in the fire, and then the house would be next. No, Lila screamed, but Vincent was already moving. He burst out the front door, rifle raised, and fired over the heads of the men approaching the barn. They scattered, horses rearing, and Vincent fired again, this time clipping the torch from one man's hand. It fell into the snow and went out with a hiss. The next shot won't be a warning, Vincent called out. Leave my animals alone. You can't take us all, Martin said, drawing a pistol. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Give me my wife and we'll leave peacefully. I'd rather die than go back to you, Lila said, appearing in the doorway with her own rifle. Her hands were steady, her voice strong. And if you try to burn this barn, I'll shoot you myself, Martin. I swear to God I will. Martin stared at her, something dark and possessive twisting his features. You choose this nobody rancher over your own husband, over the life I gave you. Life. Lila's laugh was bitter. You call what I had with you a life. You beat me, degraded me, made me afraid to breathe too loud. Vincent has shown me more kindness in 2 weeks than you did in 2 years. So yes, I choose him. I choose this. And I choose to never see you again. You little, Martin raised his pistol, aiming at Lila, and Vincent didn't think. He just moved, stepping in front of her as the shot rang out. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around, and he heard Lila scream his name. Then everything got chaotic. More shots, Lila returning fire, one of Martin's men crying out. The sound of horses and shouting, and Vincent trying to stay upright even as blood soaked his shirt. He fired back, aiming for Martin, but his shoulder was on fire and his shot went wide. And then, miraculously, more gunfire, but from a different direction. Vincent looked up to see riders coming from the direction of town, led by a man with a sheriff's star pinned to his coat. Martin and his men scattered, some firing back, others just running. Within minutes it was over, Martin and 3 of his men fleeing into the night while the others were being detained by the sheriff's men. Vincent. Lila was beside him, her hands pressed to his shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. "Oh God, you're shot, I'm all right," he managed, though the world was starting to go gray at the edges. "Just a shoulder. I've had worse." The sheriff dismounted, a grizzled man in his 50s with tired eyes. "Someone in town heard Laurent bragging about coming out here to teach you a lesson. Figured it was worth checking out. Looks like we got here just in time." "Appreciated, Sheriff," Vincent said, trying not to slur his words. The pain was getting worse now, hot and sharp. "Let's get you inside," the sheriff said. "We'll need statements from both of you, and we'll need to go after Laurent. Attempted murder of a citizen, that's serious business." They got Vincent into the house and onto the bed. Lila worked with steady hands to cut away his shirt and examine the wound. The bullet had gone clean through, missing bone, which was lucky. She cleaned and bandaged it while the sheriff watched, his eyes moving between them with a knowing look. This the wife Laurent was going on about. The sheriff asked. "This is Lila Laurent," Vincent confirmed. "She left him because he was beating her, nearly killed her before she ran. I gave her shelter during the storm and she's been here since. That's the truth of it." The sheriff looked at Lila. "That true, madam?" She nodded, not looking up from wrapping Vincent's shoulder. "Every word. I have bruises still if you need proof. Martin tried to strangle me 2 weeks ago. I thought he was going to kill me, so I ran. Vincent saved my life." "And now Laurent tried to kill him for it," the sheriff said, shaking his head. "I knew that man was bad news, but I never had proof before. Always had alibis, always had his friends backing his stories. But this is different. We got witnesses, got him firing on you unprovoked." "He'll hang for this, or at least spend a long time in prison." "He'll run," Lila said quietly. "He has money, he'll just run and start over somewhere else." "Maybe," the sheriff admitted, "but not in Montana. I'll make sure every lawman in the territory knows his face. And Mrs. Laurent, if you want to file for divorce, I know a judge who will expedite it given the circumstances." Lila looked at Vincent, something hopeful and scared in her eyes. "I want to file. I want to be free of him legally." "Then we'll make it happen," the sheriff said. "You've both been through enough." The sheriff and his men stayed the rest of the night, some sleeping in the barn, others keeping watch in case Martin tried to come back. But the night stayed quiet, just the usual sounds of wind and animals. As dawn broke over the snow-covered plains, the sheriff prepared to ride back to town. "I'll send a doctor out to check that shoulder," he told Vincent, "and I'll start the paperwork for the divorce. Mrs. Laurent, you'll need to come to town to sign some documents, but I'll make sure you're protected. Laurent won't get near you." "Thank you," Lila said, and Vincent could hear the relief in her voice. "Thank you so much." After the sheriff left, they were alone again, the house feeling both too big and too small. Vincent's shoulder throbbed, but the pain was manageable. Lila had done good work bandaging it, learning from watching him tend to minor injuries around the ranch. "You stepped in front of me," Lila said, sitting on the edge of the bed. You could have been killed. So could you? I wasn't going to let him shoot you. You barely know me." Vincent reached for her hand with his good arm. "I know you well enough, and I meant what I said before. You're worth fighting for. Worth taking a bullet for." She started crying then, not sad tears but something else, something that might have been relief or joy or just the release of 2 weeks of fear. Vincent pulled her down beside him, holding her as best he could with one arm, and let her cry it out. "I love you," Lila whispered against his chest. "Is that crazy? After only 2 weeks? But I do. I love you, Vincent Yates. Not crazy," he said, his own voice rough with emotion. "Because I love you too. Think I have since you looked at me with those green eyes and asked where you were. What do we do now? Now we heal. We wait for the divorce to come through. We build the life we want here, together." "Together," she repeated like the word was a promise. The winter passed slowly. Vincent's shoulder healed, though it ached in cold weather, a permanent reminder of that night. Lila's divorce was granted in early March, the judge citing abuse and abandonment and Martin's attempted murder as grounds for immediate dissolution. Martin himself was never caught, disappearing into the territories beyond Montana's reach, but wanted posters bearing his face went up in every town from Wyoming to Idaho. He'd never be able to show his face in civilization again. As the snow melted and spring crept across the plains, Vincent and Lila made plans. Real plans, not hypotheticals. They'd marry as soon as it was proper, build another room onto the house, expand the garden. Lila wanted chickens and maybe a milk cow. Vincent wanted to buy breeding stock, build up the herd properly. But more than any of that, they wanted each other. And they had that, had found it in the middle of a blizzard and held onto it through violence and fear and uncertainty. Vincent proposed properly in April, when the first green shoots were pushing through the thawing ground. He'd ridden to town and bought a simple gold band, nothing fancy, but Lila cried when he slipped it on her finger and asked her to be his wife. "Yes," she said, laughing through tears. "Yes, of course yes." They married in May, a small ceremony in the church in Custer with the sheriff and his wife as witnesses. Lila wore a dress she'd made herself from fabric Vincent bought, pale blue like a spring sky. Vincent wore his best shirt and pants, his dark hair finely trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when Vincent kissed his bride, it felt like the end of one story and the beginning of another. The war was over, the running was done. This was home, this woman in his arms, this life they were building. The summer was good to them. The cattle thrived, the garden produced more than they could eat, and the ranch started to feel prosperous in a way it never had when Vincent worked it alone. Lila proved to be a natural rancher, unafraid of hard work, good with the animals, able to read the weather almost as well as Vincent could. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch he'd built that spring and watch the sun set over the mountains, Lila's head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. They'd talk about everything and nothing, making plans, sharing dreams, just being together in the way that mattered most. "Do you ever regret it?" Lila asked one evening in late July, "taking me in that night? Your life would be simpler if you'd sent me away." Vincent pulled her closer. "Not for 1 second. My life was simple before you, but it was empty too. You filled a space I didn't know was hollow." "You saved me," she said simply. "We saved each other," he corrected. "You gave me a reason to be more than just a man hiding from his past. You gave me a future worth building." By autumn, Lila was pregnant, a fact they discovered with joy and not a small amount of fear. Neither of them knew much about babies, but they'd figure it out together, the way they figured everything out. Vincent built a cradle over the winter, working carefully with wood he'd saved and sanded smooth. Lila sewed blankets and little clothes, her hands steady over work that felt important in a way nothing else ever had. Their son was born in April, exactly a year after Vincent had proposed. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, healthy and strong. They named him Thomas, after Vincent's father who died when he was young. And from the moment Vincent held that tiny, perfect person, he understood what it meant to love someone more than your own life. Lila was a natural mother, patient and gentle but firm when needed. Vincent was terrified at first, sure he'd break something so small and fragile, but gradually he learned. Learned to change diapers and soothe crying and rock a fussy baby to sleep. Learned that love could grow and expand to hold more than you thought possible. The years passed in the way of good years, quick and full. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to a sturdy little boy who followed his father everywhere, mimicking his walk, his mannerisms, his careful way with the animals. 2 years after Thomas came a daughter they named Rose, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination. The ranch grew too. Vincent bought more land, expanded the herd, built a bigger barn and a bunkhouse for the hands he'd hired to help with the work. Lila's garden became the talk of Custer, her vegetables winning prizes at the county fair, her preserves sold at the general store. But more than the prosperity or the growing family, what Vincent treasured most were the quiet moments. Lila's hand in his as they walked the property line at sunset. The sound of his children's laughter ringing through the house. The way Lila still hummed when she cooked, the way she looked at him sometimes like he'd hung the moon. On their 5th anniversary, Vincent took her back to the gate where he'd found her, now repaired and painted white, flowers growing wild around the posts. They stood there together, watching the sun set over the land they'd built into a home. "You remember that night?" Vincent asked. "The blizzard, every detail," Lila said. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then I heard your voice telling me I was safe. You were safe, you are safe, always." "I know." She turned to face him, her eyes bright. "You kept your promise, Vincent, from that very first night. You promised I'd be safe, and you've spent 5 years proving it." 5 years, Vincent marveled. "Feels like forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that I get to have this life, this family. That I get to wake up every morning and not be afraid." Vincent pulled her close, kissing her the way he'd kissed her that first time in his kitchen, when he decided that letting her go would be the biggest mistake of his life. "It's real. We're real. And I promise you another 5 years, another 50 if we're blessed with them. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be afraid again." "I'm going to hold you to that," she said, smiling. "Please do." They walked back to the house together as the stars came out, the lights of home glowing warm through the windows. Inside, their children waited, and the life they'd built, and all the years still to come. Vincent had gone to war thinking he'd left his capacity for love on a battlefield in Virginia. He'd built his ranch in Montana thinking solitude was the same as peace. But a blizzard had brought him something better than peace. It had brought him purpose, partnership, love. It had brought him Lila. And standing there in the doorway of his home, watching his wife gather their children close for bedtime, Vincent understood that sometimes the best things in life came from the worst moments. That sometimes you had to weather the storm to find the clear sky on the other side. The years continued to unfold in their gentle rhythm, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved the horses, spending hours in the barn learning to gentle and train them under his father's patient guidance. Rose was wildfire by comparison, always running, always laughing, always finding new ways to test the boundaries of what she was allowed to do. In the summer of their 7th year together, Lila gave birth to twins, two boys they named Samuel and Simon. The ranch house was chaos for months, but it was the kind of chaos that came with joy, with abundance, with being well and truly blessed. Vincent hired a woman from town to help Lila with the household, a widow named Mrs. Fletcher who'd lost her husband to illness and needed the work and companionship. The cattle operation expanded enough that Vincent needed proper ranch hands year-round, not just seasonal help. He was careful about who he hired, wanting men who'd treat his family with respect, who'd work hard and be honest. Most worked out well. A few didn't, and Vincent let them go without hesitation. His family's safety would always come first. Martin Laurent was never seen again in Montana, though rumors circulated over the years. Some said he died in a mining accident in Colorado. Others claimed he'd gone to California and gotten himself killed over a card game. Vincent didn't care which story was true, as long as the man stayed gone and dead. The wanted posters had yellowed and been replaced, and eventually people forgot there'd ever been a man by that name who tried to murder a rancher over a runaway wife. Lila bloomed in their life together. The frightened, broken woman who'd collapsed at Vincent's gate was gone, replaced by someone confident and strong, someone who laughed freely and smiled often. She learned to ride properly, not side saddle but astride like the ranch women did, racing Thomas across the fields while Vincent watched with his heart in his throat and pride in his eyes. She became known in Custer and the surrounding settlements as a woman who'd help anyone in need. When the blacksmith's wife got sick, Lila was there with meals and care. When a neighbor's barn burned, she organized the women to provide food and supplies while the men rebuilt. She'd learned from her own rescue what it meant to help someone when they had nothing, and she never forgot. On quiet nights when the children were asleep and the ranch was settled, Vincent and Lila would sit together and talk about everything they'd built. The land they'd acquired, the stock they'd raised, the family they'd created. But also the intangible things, the trust, the partnership, the love that had started in crisis and matured into something deep and unshakable. You ever wonder how different life would be if that storm hadn't hit? Lila asked one evening, her head resting on Vincent's shoulder as they watched the stars from their porch. Sometimes, Vincent admitted, but I don't think it was just the storm. I think it was you. I think you would have found a way to my door eventually. That's very romantic of you. I'm serious. Some things are meant to happen. We were meant to happen. Lila turned to look at him, her face soft in the lamplight spilling from the house. I believe that. I think I was meant to find you and you were meant to find me. Everything else, all the pain and fear, it was just the path we had to walk to get here. Worth it? Vincent asked, though he knew the answer. Every single moment, she said without hesitation. The children grew as children do. Thomas turned 16 and started helping run the cattle operation in earnest, tall and capable, with his father's steady temperament and his mother's sharp mind. Rose became a teacher, traveling to town 3 days a week to help educate the growing community's children. The twins, Samuel and Simon, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, getting into trouble together, working together to solve any problem they encountered. Vincent and Lila watched their children become adults with the strange mixture of pride and sadness that all parents feel. Their home was still full, still loud with voices and activity, but there were hints of the future, of grandchildren and new generations, of the legacy they were building. On their 20th anniversary, Vincent took Lila on a trip, leaving the ranch in Thomas's capable hands for a week. They traveled to Helena, stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked through the growing city like the young couple they'd never gotten to be. Lila bought a new dress, deep green to match her eyes, and Vincent got a photograph taken of them together, standing close, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling. That photograph would hang in their house for the rest of their lives, a reminder of how far they'd come, how much they'd built, how thoroughly they'd defeated the fear and pain that had brought them together. 20 years, Lila marveled on their last night in Helena, lying in the hotel bed beside her husband. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me at your gate. Other times it feels like I've known you my whole life. Both can be true, Vincent said, pulling her close. Time's strange like that. But I know one thing for certain, these 20 years with you have been the best of my life, and I'm grateful for every single day. Even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. Those are the days that showed me what we're made of, what we can survive together. They returned to the ranch to find everything running smoothly, Thomas having handled a minor crisis with one of the horses, and Simon having fixed the gate that had been sticking. The house was clean, the animals cared for, and their children greeted them with hugs and questions about the trip. Life settled back into its familiar pattern, the seasons turning, the work continuing, the family growing and changing. Rose married a young rancher from a neighboring property, a good man who reminded Vincent of himself at that age, steady and hardworking and completely devoted to his wife. They had children, a granddaughter first and then a grandson, and Lila cried happy tears when she held each of them for the first time. Thomas married later, to a woman who'd come west from Boston seeking adventure. She was educated and capable and completely unafraid of ranch life, throwing herself into the work with enthusiasm. Samuel and Simon both courted the same girl for a while, causing family tension until she politely turned them both down and married the sheriff's son instead. Eventually, Samuel found a wife in town, a quiet woman who ran the general store, and Simon decided he preferred horses to people and stayed single, content with his life on the ranch. The years accumulated, 20 turning to 30 turning to 40. Vincent's dark hair went gray, then white. Lila's face gained lines around her eyes and mouth, but they were lines from smiling, from laughter, from a life well lived. They slowed down, handing more of the daily operations to their children and hired hands, but they never stopped being active, never stopped being partners in everything. On a warm evening in early September, 42 years after Lila had collapsed at Vincent's gate, they sat together on the porch watching the sun set over land they'd worked and loved for decades. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the property, visible in glimpses, a testament to everything they'd built. "You remember what you said that first night?" Lila asked, her hand finding Vincent's the way it always did. "When you brought me inside." "I said you were safe," Vincent replied. "That you were safe here now. You were right, I have been safe. Every day for 42 years I've been safe and loved and free. You gave me that, Vincent. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," he corrected gently. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." "Maybe we should call it even," Lila said, smiling. "Deal." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the air cooling, the sounds of evening settling over the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, one of their grandchildren laughed, the sound carrying clear and bright. "No regrets?" Vincent asked, the same question he'd asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Lila answered, the same answer she always gave. "You?" "Just one," Vincent said, and Lila looked at him in surprise. "That I didn't find you sooner, that we didn't get more than 42 years. "We still have time," Lila said firmly. "We're not done yet," and she was right. They had more time, years more, to watch their grandchildren grow, to see the ranch continue to prosper. to sit on their porch and watch sunsets and remember the blizzard that had changed everything. Vincent Yates lived to be 83 years old, surrounded by family in the house he'd built with his own hands. Lila held his hand as he passed, tears streaming down her face, whispering that she loved him, that she'd see him soon, that he'd kept every promise he'd ever made to her. She followed him 2 years later in her sleep, peacefully, the way she'd hoped to go. Their children buried her beside Vincent on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the gate where their story had begun. The headstones were simple but clear. Vincent Yates, beloved husband and father, and Lila Yates, beloved wife and mother. Safe here now. The ranch continued, passed down through generations, each adding their own chapter to the story. But the heart of it, the foundation, was always Vincent and Lila, the cowboy and the woman he'd found crying in a blizzard, who'd built something extraordinary from the ashes of fear and pain. Their great-grandchildren would grow up hearing the story, how great-grandpa Vincent had found great-grandma Lila during the worst storm Montana had seen in years, how he'd promised she was safe and spent the rest of his life proving it, how they'd faced down violence and built a life anyway, how love could bloom even in the harshest winter. The gate remained, repainted over the years but never replaced, a landmark and a reminder. Some of the grandchildren swore they could feel something there on cold nights, something warm and protective, like the ranch itself remembered the promises made and kept, and maybe it did. Maybe love like that left an imprint, changed the land itself. Or maybe it just changed the people, teaching them what it meant to offer shelter, to keep promises, to build something that would outlast your own life. Either way, the story lived on, passed down, remembered, cherished. The story of a blizzard and a gate and a cowboy who said, "Come inside. You're safe here now," and meant it with every fiber of his being. The story of a woman who'd found the courage to run and the wisdom to stop running when she found home. The story of two people who'd saved each other and built a legacy of love and safety and family that echoed down through the generations. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled across the Montana plains, the lights of the Yates Ranch still glowed warm and welcoming, a beacon of safety in the storm, just as it had been that first night 42 years ago, just as it would be for all the years to come. The end, but really, just the beginning of everything that mattered.